It is 6:01, so we'll get started. And if people come late, they come late, and that's okay. So everyone, welcome. And we are excited here about Documentary Comics Night with Camilo Aguirre, who graduated with us in 2020. Oh my gosh, can you believe it's been 2 years? Time flies. And so without any further ado, I'm just going to hand it over because Camilo's the expert. So thanks, everyone.
All right, that's good. Now I'm nervous. All right, so hi, hello everyone. My name is Camilo Aguirre. I'm from Colombia. I studied my MFA at MCAD. I graduated in 2020, and I focused a little bit on documentary comics because that's what I was doing. It's not like I discovered it or something, but it's like a whole process. What I got involved with was the actual concept of documentary comics and how it worked, like because I was kind of enamored of that concept. When I was at MCAD, I found a couple of books that were like super important for me in the sense of like, okay, so now I have like a way of conceptualizing this, and I have a way of like defining how documentary comics work. And I also have a tool, and it was so important for me because I was making comics and they were nonfiction, but I was like mixing history, and I was mixing like personal stories, interviews. I was doing like a lot, and I didn't even have a script. And I think this couple authors helped me a little bit to have an idea of like what I was doing. So yeah, the first author was Nina Mikwitz. I'm sorry, the presentation is in English. I had it in, and it's in English. I had it in English, but I didn't find it. So Nina Mikwitz is the first author. She has this book, Documentary Comics, Graphic Truth Telling in a Skeptical Age. And it's an approach of like, what does it mean to document in comics? So she makes like this parallel between the film, which sort of like shows like the idea of like documentation, but she mentions like, well, the camera is sort of like a filter. It's not the truth, like this product. And her definition of documentary comics goes through that, like through this idea of like, we document by actually showing the trick, and the trick is here in our hands, right? Like for cartoonists, at least, we draw, and the drawing has personal characteristics of like how our body is, right? What our body has gone through. I'm going to show you an example of that in a bit. Also like how we see things, how we edit things, like all the trick. Well, film, on the other hand, film is like showing us like an illusion, like it looks like like reality, but it is edited and it is like scripted, and you can like change the things. Well, we cartoonists are showing the thing and our subjectivity. So that is the main thing that I wanted to point out from this marvelous author, who gave me like tons of references and tons of like books to read that I haven't, but they are there in a folder because I have PDFs. The second author is Hilary Chute, who made this book last night. I was like, oh, I gotta prepare for the conference. I was like watching some of her conferences. So when she wrote about documentary formats and documentary comics, she drew like a historic line, right, from I don't know, like from Goya, right, to I don't know, to like depictions of war and depictions of conflict. So in the case of Hilary Chute, I think her approach usually mentions the idea of witnessing, or like witnessing conflict, or and getting involved with reality, which is, I mean, it's super important, and it's very interesting also because she, like in this historic line, she got involved with, like, for example, wordless novels and the work of Lind Ward, and a lot of like political involvement in Europe and the United States in the early 20th century, but it has this trait. So these two authors gave me like this idea of like, oh, documentary comics. So they are, yeah, like super nice, and then can help me to thread these three things, right? Like Persepolis, Palestine, the Yosako, and Mouse, right? That I think is banned in some places now in the US. I don't know, I heard that. So yeah, like this idea of like telling like an autobiography, right? Showing an autobiography, showing like a coming of age story, but also like depicting conflict and having it in the same narrative genre, and in the language of comics and in the grammar to say something, or in the language of comics. So that was important for me. I was like, this is what I want to make. I had this, but I don't want to read aloud. Yeah, like she was talking like about the aesthetic of like comics and how it works. But if you want me to summarize it, I think it's like the idea of like using your hands to express your subjectivity in relationship to a document, or the act of documenting something, right? This is like, I can translate. I know how to speak Spanish. So on the one hand, Mickwitz approaches the genre in a very descriptive way, trying to establish like the rules of the medium and the idea of like truth telling through nonfiction. You know, like she mentions like many other comics. For example, she has like a chapter about Harvey Piker, and some chapters of like about different graphic novels, like from many places in the world, including like India and Iran, and yeah. And on the other hand, Chute in Disaster Drone approaches like the genre through the idea of like witnessing, and I speculate that is because of this approach through conflict and historical conflict, like war and stuff like that. In this presentation, I usually have like examples, like, hey, there's Mouse, right, by Art Spiegelman, and Persepolis by Marjan Satrapi, and Palestine by Yosako. You can see that there's like depictions of like very important historical events, and also Harvey Piker with his autobiographies, which I love. Actually, Harry gave me this book, who's in the chat now. And we have like in Latin America, we have like Power Paola from the 2000s, right? And she make like this autobiography story, which is amazing. And it has like this very like I don't know, like integrating Latin American identity, because it happens like in 3 countries, you know, Colombia, Ecuador, and France, and it was like drawn partly in Argentina. So yeah, Barbari by Jesus Cosio, which is about the political violence in Peru. This is like part 2. The first part is called Rupai, right? So to tell you, like we can depict like conflict, and he was actually like seeing like archives and interviews and all that kind of stuff in order to make depictions of that violence, which is like very direct and very graphic in many cases. There's some other examples. This is Alpha by Jens Harder. That is like, it's like natural history, but like in a silent comic, which is huge. I saw like pages of that while installing something for the German government like a couple of years ago, and I was like, whoa, this is amazing. Now it's there's like tons of pages of that, like his advanced law. I brought this, like Sherry Wilbur, Draw Stronger. I consider that a documentary comic. Why not? And I brought this by Jessica Abel, and I brought the like some magazines that are there in France and in many places. You Americans have the nib, right? Like showing like documentary formats in magazines in order to make like essays or journalism or small stories. about nonfiction or the current situation. In this one, for example, there's like a lot of stuff about like what happened with the Amazon workers in Europe during the pandemic. Yeah, like that kind of stuff. And My Degeneration, which is cited in this book by Nina Mikwitz. I think if you're interested, I think it's in many libraries in the US. I got it from the U of M. And what this is like about Parkinson's disease, and the authors, Peter Dunlap-Scholl, his journey through Parkinson's, and the actual drawing changes. So this is the example that I wanted to show you, that like that subjectivity of documenting with your hands is yeah, it's like your body. It's not like your own tool. Your body is like the vehicle for that subjectivity. And in this particular book about his process or his journey through Parkinson's disease, how that goes, right? So yeah, you can see that the drawing changes along the novel, right? So yes, I that's what I wanted to mention, like this idea of like showing the trick, or like being like super understanding that it is like a product of your mind and your hands and your eyes, and you don't have a camera, you're actually like drawing. So that was super attractive to me, right, in my process. And let me see, because I think there's like certain indisciplinary quality to it, right? Like we have like many ways to approach like documentary comics. We don't only have like yes. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, like we don't only have like yeah, like one genre to approach it. We have like yeah, like different genres and there's like a lot of yeah, like interdisciplinarity, if that is a word. So I prepared this one before for like another course, right? There's something about the background in the like in other workshops that I gave, like this kind of approach that Hilary Chute has. Like, okay, so this idea of like documenting comes from wordless novels, which are also known as woodcut novels, right? Because they all showed like the reality, and they wanted to show like this idea of like witnessing with, you know. So there's like books that include philosophy, like at least for me, that's my opinion, like Unflattening by Nipsey Sanis, or like Logic, or Mental Health, right? But My Degeneration, this book. Let me see, Neurology. All of this is in MCAD's library so far, except this one. Natural History, as I was saying. Journalism, this book is amazing. I love it. Like the conversations, it's about like the storytelling and radio and like a lot of stuff, and they have like conversations, right? And then it's great. So in my like big brush approach, I put like everything in the same bag. Like, yeah, documentary comic, that is a documentary comic. Also like the books by Linda Barry about teaching or social research. I put my own here, cartography, because we had like these ideas about like how to depict like territory and dispossession, and yeah, like how to get like, I don't know, like how to depict like conflict. Also like about art or art history, sexology. This is a good book. It's at MCAT's library. Yeah, like different kinds of like biographies, or yeah, like different kinds of approaches to documentary comics, and different sciences and stuff. And you don't even need to know how to draw. You just need to put out your idea. So at some point, I want to show you this. at some point, I was making my own comics in Colombia in 2011. I was like, I want, yes, yeah, thank you. I want to make comics. I said this in 2011, and I noticed something. Right, I noticed that whenever I interviewed people, because I wasn't like a good script writer, I had to interview people, and I found their stories fun, and I was like, yeah, I'm gonna draw that, and I found that many of the stories that people told me had to do with reality, like with the historical reality of Colombia. There's always like some kind of conflict going on, like the actual conflict of. So people would tell me, yeah, they killed some people in my town, and I was like, where did you live? What was there? And they were like, in this place, and I would look. I would research, and it was like a massacre, and then I would discuss like, was it this massacre? And they would be like, yeah, but it was not a massacre. It was like 11 people. It's like nothing, you know. A massacre is like 50, and yeah, like that kind of stuff. And I would say like, oh my God, they have like these amazing histories, like about that conflict with the actual narrative of, I don't know, like official history. So for me, it was a chance to make comics about like things that at least for me like mattered, you know. uh, like the conflict in Colombia, or the history of my own country, or like at least like people's stories, you know. That's like a like an infinite resource of stories for me. I don't know. So yeah, I wanted to make some stuff about memory and about the depiction of memory, and I started like making one book about my dad, because my dad would tell me like stories about when he was like a union leader in a union, and he was like persecuted by the state and then by other groups, and he would tell me like about the ethics of the union, like where were the Marxists, where were the, you know, like Maoists, and what did they do, and what would they eat, and yeah, that kind of stuff. And I was amazed by those stories because I didn't see him like a lot during that time frame. So I made a book about it, and it was a success because it was not like a, I don't know, like a report about the victims, which we have with the National Memory Center, you know. So yeah, like the it was not about history, but it was like about those subjective anecdotes and things that were like real, because they were, right? And once I did this, someone called me, like a friend of mine, Pablo Guerra, and he told me like, hey, do you know the region of Montes de Maria? And I was like, yes, that was very affected by the violence. And he was like, it is. And I was like, why? Because we are thinking of joining a group of researchers. There's like anthropologists, sociologists, hydrologists, a lot of social scientists, and they are making like a research about how there's something called like everyday dispossession, and there's a concept called like green deserts, and there's like this research going on, and the community also wants to like make visible their situation. So would you like to participate as a cartoonist there and be part of this project? And I was like, yeah, of course, absolutely. I want to be that. And once I was there, they were like, so this is one of our researchers. And I was like, whoa, I am one of the researchers. Yeah, and I was drawing, you know, I was, but there were good things about that. So like I would interview people, and they would tell me stuff like while I was drawing. And some of the researchers would be like, did they tell you about that? That's weird. I was like, yeah, I was just drawing. I didn't even ask questions because I'm shy. So yeah, that those results like were amazing, and we published that book. And whenever someone asks me about that book, it's like, hey, were you the guy who made this book about like qualitative methods of social research? And I was like, is it about that, right? So yeah, like that was a great experience, and it helped me to understand like what did I want, you know, and what was possible with these kind of books. So yeah, like these kinds of representations, and uh, like to be able to be in the field, and to be able to I don't know, and also earn money. Why not? Like I was paid for this project. It was one of the first projects that I was paid for. This one they paid me in books. This one they gave me money to go there, and it was good. So the next thing that happened was that as we made this book, they called us for this book with the National Center of Historical Memory. Both cases, books were scripted by partly by the community, partly by Paulo Guerra, which is my friend, and we always had like feedback from the community. Like they would say like, we don't have shoes like that, or they would say like, hey, that was they actually gave me like a very nice trick to to show like a place full of trees. They told me like, hey, you shouldn't draw all of the mango trees. It's like a lot of work. And the thing that we see all the time is the shadows on the ground of casted by the mango trees. So why don't we just like put the shadows there? And I was like, yeah, that works. And yeah, that was kind of their feedback and what was important for them. For example, in this particular book, they would tell me like, you know what? I think you should put a lot of animals. And I was like, why? Animals are important. And I was like, why? Because we have to make make sure that people understand that we make our living out of animals. Like we are not farmers that just like plant I don't know, trees or just like fruit or vegetables. Like there's not a lot of this in here. Like half of the year the weather is like horrible. It's like 110 uh, Fahrenheit, to say a number. I don't know about Fahrenheit. And the other half of the year, the weather is like so wet. There's like a lot of rain, so motorcycles won't like take us off the land. So we would use like donkeys or that kind of stuff. So we are very carnivorous. We eat a lot of animals, and the animals helps us. So put a lot of animals in the book. So I made like a spread with like cows in it, you know, like for like one resting page was like just a spread of like a showing depicting cows. So yeah, I was thinking like about the idea of like historical memory, how historical memory is something super important, right? I wanted to implement anecdotes, and I wanted to know like about the idea of what is an anecdote, you know, like how can I work with an anecdote. I did a thesis at MCAD, and that thesis was like, okay, so I want to know about what is the role of an anecdote and what is the role of like I don't know, like theory or facts or in a documentary. The conclusion was like an anecdote is something that is useful for empathy, but it is not like something that would I don't know, like would work a lot with a non-fictional plot. We have to also to have like actions and stuff. It's also not useful in terms of like truth telling, like in terms of like facts. So I have to add context, and anecdotes by definition at that time, I don't remember the definition that I used in the thesis, is like they are contextless. So we don't have context in the anecdote, and that is the reason that it causes empathy, because I don't, like, anyone can identify with them. So and that's what I would get from people, you know, like anecdotes, and that's what attracted me from documentary formats, like the possibility to put humor in situations of disaster or situations of conflict or you know, like violence. Yeah. And anecdotes help me with that. Yeah. So I also participated in this amazing book that I was fortunately participating with, called Our Voices Carry Us Here, by Green Card Voices. Also, Harry Gao in the chat is a participant in that book. So yeah, that book was a great opportunity for me, because I was now by myself without the team of social researchers, making documentary comics and interviewing people and asking them, like, how do I do this? How do you want me to portray you? What should I do with this? How should this go? You know. Yeah, the link is in the chat. Yes. So yeah, it was a great chance, and yeah. So this is like a page from this book that I wanted to show, and there's something about the thesis, or it's not the thesis, it's part of the thesis, but it's part of like a project that I made for like 3 years. During my master's degree, I found narrative strategies that come from documentary in order to talk about these subjects, you know, like using anecdotes with like I don't know, like an effective usage of anecdotes. What Remains, which is the name of the book, combines stories of like personal stories, personal experiences, the history of Colombia, interviews, and I also like mix, according to my convenience, I mix those strategies. Like, for example, there are some pages in which I just like, I didn't like the official history, so I just interviewed some friends who are historians, and I put that interview there. And that interview was like me being like super ignorant about it, like being like, can I say this? And they were like, no, you cannot say this, that it's not the truth, that it's like a reduction of the situation. And I was like, I think I'll say this. I want to say this. And that's the actual comic. So yeah, it's like ways of taking advantage of those strategies, right? There's also like some layers that I had, like narrative, cultural and ethics, right? Like culture and ethics, which is like how to not be how to not be a bad person. Political history, which is like my approach was like very not trying to be objective with that, was trying to be like very subjective from my point of view. And also like narrative strategies, like how to I needed to tell a story still. Like, it's still a book that people is going to read, and they need to be like entertained, and they need to be like engaged with it. And yeah, like I needed to do this kind of thing, like to appeal to how this works, like how yeah, like how to mix this. So what I made was some pages that included like political history, because I needed context all the time. Like I wanted to talk about like the history of my country, which is Colombia. And I had like a lot of acronyms, which were like guerrilla groups, and people would be like, what is that? And sometimes I would have like another acronym, was like I don't know, like a school, and people would be like, what is that? Is that a guerrilla group? And I was like, no, that's a school. Yeah, like I needed like to mix all of this and to give like functions to each one of these kinds of pages, and to have like graphic elements that gave me like I don't know, like some sort of value to the way I was using my pages. And in terms of culture and ethics, I was also trying to think like, where am I being like one-sided, but in a bad way, like against any I don't know, like any minority in my country that I'm not seeing, or where am I being like I don't know, like judgmental with certain people, because I was being judgmental all the time. Like I knew this wasn't like an objective story. And in the narrative part, I was all the time drawing. How to say that? I was like drawing like graphs with the plot of the book. You know, I was like drawing little mountains to say like, where did the conflict go, and there were like macro stories that showed like other kinds of like the big plot of the book or the organization of the pages. So I would work with that. And yeah, so there's something about subjectivity in the book. There were some other pages that I needed to put there, like as I don't know, like putting myself in the book. Yeah, like this first page that I like, which is like a contemplative page. It is an image that I like, that I enjoy, because it's like I remember that feeling. I remember that feeling of like being like 3 or 5, or I don't remember. Yeah, like being like 5 years old, and my dad would be like holding me in his arms, and I would like put my chin against his hair in the middle of a protest, and there were like this huge noise of like many people like screaming and chanting and all that. So I like that image, and I wanted to put it in the book, like as a first image. And also like inventing or interpreting stories, and this is something that I really enjoy, which is going to sound weird, but I really like misinterpretation. Diana, there's one publisher that is going to. We can answer questions in a bit, but yeah, it is going to be published. Yeah. So in this other one, it's in this other page. I was hearing like a story from my dad. Like he would make like activism when he was like super young, like in school, like in high school. He would like go to protests, and in this story they have to eat like a lot of pamphlets to not get caught by the police, because they were like communist pamphlets that they had. One of them had, and yeah, it's like a story about that. And it's like this guy who sees them, like who's like a witness, and doesn't say anything. He doesn't snitch on them. So yeah, like this idea of like being subjective, it's also like, oh, it sometimes it comes from contemplation and for like a very emotional place, and sometimes it comes from like me being able to exaggerate or misinterpret like the stories that I get from people, which is also, I think, also can be good, can be a good thing. Sometimes I wanted to talk about like data, because in Colombia, something that happens is that numbers are, horrible. Numbers are horrible. Like it's there's been like one year, right? Like 2021, or not even 2021. In 2022, a lot of activists have been killed in Colombia, and numbers are usually like this. Like during Uribe's government administration, during Uribe's administration from 2008 to 2016, it's like there were like 3 million victims. So that's our numbers. Like it is usually like overwhelming. It's like many digits, you know, big numbers, victims, blood, assassinations, dispossession. And sometimes I needed to show like those numbers, like talking about like what happens with union workers, what happens with activists, what happens with social leaders, what happens with community leaders. And I didn't want to make like the same kind of page, like showing like a story. I wanted to like stop the reading and like do something else, like almost like a poster, almost like an kind of infographic page. And I wanted to show like a lot of information. I don't know if people is going to be interested in that information, maybe not, but I wanted to show like those numbers, and I had to make like another kind of page for that. And some other kind of page was like me reflecting on the same project. This is like me with Zach, my mentor during the MFA program. And I had to stop in the making of the book because the book was made without a script. I would like improvise and I would like draw pages. There's pages that I drew that are not in book now. And I would be like, okay, so what do I do with this? So I would stop and make a book about making and make a page about making the book, right? I would make like reflect on my own. Yeah, I would reflect on what was I doing. Like I would ask myself questions and put them in the book, or talk to myself, or talk to someone else, you know. Yeah, because I had like many doubts, and I needed to put that there. So I think it's, I don't know, it's like a very complicated way to make a book, but it is what I learned and during this process, right? Like with documentary comics and trying to study documentary comics while I was making a documentary comic. There's some of the strategies that I have, like having many subplots, like many tiny plots. That's one strategy, and try to fit the subplots within like a bigger structure of the book. The second strategy that I implemented was having sections, like chunks of the book that were about something and chunks of the book that were about some other thing. Having timelines. Why? Because I was working with history and I was working with interviews. And those interviews also had like a place in history. So sometimes I would decide to talk about the 60s, or sometimes I would decide to talk about the 60s in the 2000s with someone that I was interviewing or something like that. Collaboration with social scientists. I bugged my sociologists and lawyer friends about what I was doing. I was like, can I say that? Can you please read these couple pages to see if I'm correct in this statement? And they would be like, okay, sometimes, and some other times they would say like, no, you cannot say this, you have to say that. I would also take advantage of that, as I told you earlier. And yeah, time is very important while making documentaries in general. Did you know that? That's good. Like when I studied script writing a long time ago. I don't remember a lot, but when they talked about documentaries, that is one strategy that you have. If you are like filming a documentary with real people or real places or like in reality, right? Sometimes you just have to wait and things will untie. They will be solved by themselves, or they will present a change that can be used as a like as a point of tension or as a point of resolution for the story. In this case, I didn't have much time, but I wanted to use time as a tool. So I reflected on the idea of the 3 years that I spent on it. Almost 3 years. Yeah, like 2.5 years. And another thing, which is a graphic tool, is to have different kind of pages that look different, as like resting pages, having changes in the visual pace to say something, right? So yeah, that is what I what I learned from making this book. And from these two authors, which I didn't read a lot. Don't think that I read all of the books. I read like some pages, and from some of these books that are documentary comics, and yeah. There's also something like right now I'm working with like more projects that have this structure, and sometimes there's like processes of fictionalization that you have to go with, not in the case of the last book, but in this one, yeah, I think a little bit, but it's just more like exaggeration or addition than fictionalization. But I think like this idea of like subjectivity also includes that, also includes like the action of like protecting someone's identity or changing something or adding someone's idea of something, right? Like for example, in this page, there's like this idea of like thinking about the land and drawing their own land. So yeah, it's like there's also like a little bit of fictionalization in this kind of process that I think it's worth mentioning. So in general, yeah, I discovered like that you can have like many strategies for making documentary comics. You can get into many genres, not only like talking about like conflict or reality or autobiography or science. Or, yeah, you have like many possibilities. It is a whole world, and yeah, there's many things that you can do with it. So that's it. I don't know if you want to go
That's
with
great,
questions.
Camilo. Thank you. That's awesome. We'll take a second to let people, well, actually, Diana asked one question, and yep, and has her their hand up right now. Diana, would you like to ask your question out loud? I mean, we're such a small group. You can ask if you want, or you can type it in the chat, either one.
Camilo, hola, ¿cómo estás?
Hola.
Pues fuera de la pregunta del libro de tu maestría What Remains, si va a ver, pues qué editorial te lo va a publicar, también quería preguntarte sobre un libro que tú publicaste en el 2011, Calidez Aislada. Yo entiendo que es una novela gráfica, pero esta no fue documental porque veo que no la incluiste dentro de tu producción, y qué pena pues hablar en español con todos acá en inglés.
Está bien, está bien. ¿Puedo responderte en inglés?
Yes.
Well, there's a book that I made called Calidez Aislada. Like I think it translates like isolated warmth. And yeah, I made that book, but it's not documentary. When I made that book, I was like my first comic, and it got published, and it's the one that has had like the most printed books. It was like 10,000 books. And it was going to be given for free because it was paid by the government of Bogota. It is not. I was like making interviews, and I was seeing like people, and I was walking around like with a little notebook, drawing like whatever I saw. So it was inspired in different people and in real stories, and I braided them at some point, but I consider it like a fictional story because I crafted like the structure of the plots that get braided together, that get weaved together. So sí, no es tan ficción, pero sí me basé como en gente como del barrio, como gente de varias partes, y pues también me ayudaron con cosas de, pues Pablo Guerra fue mi asesor en ese momento por primera vez de guión, y me ayudó como un poquito a acomodar los personajes porque tenía como unos conflictos que estaban difíciles de resolver, y así fue que se acomodó el libro.
¿Y todavía hay ejemplares a la venta?
Hay un PDF en IDARTES. O sea, hay un PDF que está gratis, y yo creo que por ahí hay ejemplares, pero yo no volví a ver la edición roja. La última vez que la vi tenía tapa azul.
Ok, gracias.
Okay. So yeah.
Wonderful. That's great. I wonder if anybody else has any questions. Anyone?
we can like, if you don't have questions, we can like talk, and I can like, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, there's so much, like there's so much in there. It's like a wave of knowledge just washed over us. So I'm sure people are just processing all of that, all those great strategies and all of the great books too. I know like one of the first things I want to do later is like look at some of these books in the MCAD library. It's great that so many of them are there. How about a question about what's next for you? What's up on what's your next project?
So I think I want to publish this.
Oh, good.
So I think I'll publish it. I think maybe it will be published in June. Maybe.
That's incredible. That's right around the corner.
Yes. So I started like a family story that was like I started like a story about like my own family. I have been making a project which was usually formalized through installation and whatever, like it's installation and sculpture, installation and painting, installation and drawing, and it was like about this idea of like how personal stories usually are transversal to social history. So I would like interview my grandparents and my granduncles, and they would tell me like about oh, you know, you had an uncle who, when the war came, he cut his fingers to not shoot, to not be able to shoot, so he won't be drafted. So he didn't have like the index fingers. And I was like, well, that's kind of radical. I like that. And they were like, yeah. And some of them were like, yeah, he was gay. And I was like, oh, okay. And I would draw that, and I would draw like also the different interpretations of that and kind of like the gossip behind it. So like, oh, did you know like your great mother, like the grandma of your grandma, that she worked for like a sugarcane company because her father suicided because that sugar company like broke him to bankruptcy. So she ended up working for the people that made his father kill himself. Her father killed himself. So I was like, yeah, I love these stories, and I was seeing like the history of Colombia within the history of my own family. So I every 2 years I would wait for like a museum or an NGO or a university to fund these projects, and I would make like an installation or something like that. And I got like 4 stories. Every 2 years I would get like one of these projects done. Until a couple of years ago, I decided like, what if I make a novel with this? And I started making it. But then the process of like script writing it, it was like I ended up having to make it fiction, because there were some things that I liked, some stories that I liked, but the timelines weren't like right there. So there was a story about, I don't know, like the guy who cut his fingers, and also like the story about the guy who was going to become a priest and ended up like giving all his money to the church, and then he almost starved later. So like there was like so many things that I wanted to include in the same plot line that I ended up making like a novel. And a friend of mine made a joke like, oh, so you're making the traditional, how to say that, like the epoch traditionalist familiar Colombian novel, you know? And I was like, oh sheesh, yeah, I'm such a conservative, you know. And then I saw Encanto, and I was like, yeah. So that's awesome. what I'm working on right now. I hope
I love it.
Yeah, I haven't written the end.
Okay, so it's still, yep, partly undone, but yeah, that's an exciting work in progress. And I also saw Harry has his hand up. So yes. I don't know, Harry.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions, if that's okay.
Yeah.
The first is, you're talking a lot about the development of your approach to documentary comics and kind of all of these different strategies and techniques and approaches that you put into What Remains, right? Which, I mean, you worked on that all through your degree. It was a huge effort and, it paid off. It's a wonderful book. My first question is, with all of the different things that you put into like this kind of a big book, right? How has your work changed since that, right? Like, are there strategies that you used for this book that maybe you're not using now? Are there other strategies that you're choosing to use? Are you changing kind of like the approach that you're taking to your work now that you're done with this project?
Yes. I think one particular thing from What Remains is that I started with a script, and then the whole idea of like what the project was going to be changed, and then I started working without a script for a while, for like, yeah. So I was like juggling with plot lines and with like general structures, not even like a plot for the book itself, but like a structure for the book. So that was very difficult, and that compelled me to have these strategies and to implement them, just because I needed to solve it. Nowadays, since the pandemic, I have worked like way more with like digital drawing, and also I try to work a little bit more with like a general script, even if like the project that I'm working on right now doesn't have an end, like doesn't have like an ending. But yeah, I would say that like it has changed, and the drawing has changed, and things have changed. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And my second question, what's my second question? Yeah. So I mean, for this book, for What Remains, you worked a lot with, researchers, historians, journalists, these kinds of folks, right? I mean, you were connected to a ton of people who were, approaching this topic from different angles, right? And, your approach was yours, and it was distinctive and kind of, touching in its own way, but you were kind of connected to this broader web. You mentioned that when you did the Green Card Voices project, that it was, sort of your first time just kind of doing that kind of documentary work on your own, right?
Yeah.
So my question is, do you think you'll try to like, be connected to like other researchers and other folks for future work, or do you think you'll be doing more stuff on your own? Like, what kind of are your preferences and feelings about these different modes of working, like being plugged into this big community of people working on the same topic versus kind of trying to explore and tell the story more individually?
I think it depends. Like if someone gives me like a project about dispossession in the Caribbean coast of Colombia, it would scare me a little bit to do it alone, because I know like what it implies, and like that if it goes wrong, I can actually like do damage. And yeah, so it depends. And in some other projects, I would gladly, like whenever I'm working with family and with certain parts of the family, I can go alone, because I can mock myself, I can mock my dad, I can, like I have like more plasticity with them as characters, or with some friends, right? So yeah. Is that
That makes sense. Thank you.
all right?
Wonderful. We've got a couple minutes left here. Does anyone else have a question? No. Any last wisdom thoughts? Camilo, you want to share with us?
I think today, I think people in the chat will be like, those are not documentaries. What is he talking about? And they were like, the whole process was like, oh, I found this. Oh, I found that. Oh, what is this? And yeah, so it was like a process of discovery, and I mean, it's not like I'm not an academic, or I don't know, I haven't like made like academic writing. So yeah, I think it's different, and I just like going through these processes, and I don't know, like showing like things that I found along the way, and yeah.
That was wonderful. It was so great to see, because you really illustrated your thought process throughout all of this. It was super clear. So it felt like we got a peek inside your head. Yeah, that process is non-linear.
Yeah.
Which is great. It's always good for artists to be hearing that from other artists. Like, don't worry if your work feels scattered or a little bit all over the place. It's normal, you know. So
Yes.
wonderful.
Yeah, and there's some stuff that I don't know, like other jobs can like influence your work later, because like there was something that happened actually, like I can like make that little remark, which is like in this book, and there's the thing with time. In this book, I made it, and I wanted to have like a beat for the ending, and that beat was like, what is next? How is the future? How is blah? How is, and it was all about like what's going on once I return, what's going to happen. So I put like a relationship that wasn't, and I put like my family situation, and I put like my political hopes in Colombia, and then there was the return, and that's like something about processes that never end, and you have to cut it, like with documentary comics, you have to cut at some point. And I returned, and everything was like so different. Like the book is almost like a memory from another age, because I'm in another context now, and it's yeah. So
Absolutely. I can't even imagine how much different it is. Like, so much has happened since May 2020. So
yeah.
oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much, Camilo. This has been fantastic. I feel so lucky. And if anybody wants to like turn on your camera or your audio to do round of applause, feel free. Yay. Thank you so much, Camilo. And we hope everybody has a beautiful evening. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for inviting me.